sign the medical certificate, and pass the straitjacket. Maybe not that simple, but not far from the truth. Louisa Nottage in 1846 was falsely imprisoned into a mental asylum by her family. We look at her story and what life was really like for people that had to endure life in a mental asylum during the 19th century. The simple act of declaring that someone was suffering from religious hysterics would be enough to have them incarcerated. One famous story is that of Louisa Nottage. She was abducted, thrown into an asylum by family, basically so that her inheritance would be kept intact for her brothers to claim. Louisa had 6 sisters, 4 brothers. The Nottage family were wealthy wool suppliers who resided in Essex. They lived on a large estate where Louisa grew up reading religious text and faithfully attending church. Now, when the father Josiah died in 1844, each sister received £6,000. Here's the catch. 5 were unmarried, which, in those times, was not ideal. This is when the local priest Henry James Prince convinces the sisters to move away with him and found a new religious community in Somerset called Agapimony, the Abode of Love. He has 3 clergymen, ready and willing to marry. Through some smooth talking, Prince manages to convince 3 of the sisters to marry. They do this all on the same day, ensuring the new wives' assets are passed straight to the brand new husbands. At this point, Louisa is now the only unmarried sister. Her mother Emily, brother Edmund, nephew Edward, and son-in-law Frederick now conspire to abduct her, as they do not like the power Prince has over her religiously or financially. They want to bring her home and allow her to regain her senses away from the clutches of the priest. The men travel to Somerset, grab her and hold her at Ripley's Villa, London in 1846. During this time, while she's locked up, Louisa continuously claims the divinity of the priest Henry Prince. It is now that her mother, Emily, makes the move to have her certified insane. Louisa is locked up in an asylum for the wealthy called Moorcroft House Asylum in Hillingdon. In January 1848, after 2 years of asylum life, our heroine Louisa managed to escape. She heads straight to meet Reverend William Cobb from the Agapimony community at a local hotel. Louisa was then recaptured 2 days later at Paddington Station. It's at this point that Reverend Cobb contacts the commissioners in lunacy. A report made by Commissioner Brian Proctor ultimately led to her release in May of 1848. The story does not end there. Louisa then sued her family for abduction and false imprisonment. This trial was big news and was reported daily via the Times newspaper. She won the case, plus was awarded damages. Louisa, true to herself, promptly returned to Agapimony and transferred all her assets to the priest Henry Prince. She remained in his community until her death in 1858. After her death, Louisa's brother then sued Prince to recoup some of the money for his family due to the obvious influence the priest had held over her life. The courts sided with the Nottages, and Prince had to pay up. So after all that drama, the money returned to the family. Fun fact, this case was so high profile in 1850, Charles Dickens reported on the case of Louisa Nottage and the Agapimony. One of the original asylums actually began as a priory in London, England around 1247, then a hospital in the 1300s, before slowly progressing to admit mentally ill patients in the 1400s. The name of this was Bethlehem Royal Hospital in London, which would go on to have the nickname Bedlam. Patients were treated in various inhumane ways due to the fact that many of these places were simple commercial entities. It was not until 1774 when the Madhouse Act was introduced, which then meant you required a license for each asylum property, plus it was to be inspected yearly. By the 1800s, there was small progress thanks to the passing of the County Asylum Act, which meant each county needed to look after their own patients. During this time frame from 1845 to 1890, over 60 asylums were built, and with the work of John Connolly and Lord Shaftesbury, they moved to patients being treated as such and not as prisoners. There were two ways to enter, either a pauper, which would require a medical certificate signed by a doctor or apothecary within 7 days, also signed by a justice, a clergyman, an overseer, or the relieving officer under the Poor Law was required. Now, if you were rich, you were required to have 2 doctors' signatures. Even though this procedure was in place, the asylum was ultimately the perfect place to clean up a town of the poor and diseased. There's no way to refute that the asylum was an ideal dumping ground for unwanted wives. Of course, there were people who genuinely went to the asylum and received treatment for a variety of reasons, such as trauma in childbirth, general exhaustion from life, or men suffering from shell shock due to the war. The list of ailments for entry was long and not favorable to women. One of the best ones was being admitted due to hysteria or overaction of the mind. In a society where women were meant to be seen and not heard, as a female, if you did not fit the mold, were an avid reader, or dared to speak out against your husband, this could be grounds for hysteria. Once inside, the men and women were separated. There were very strict rules around this. If you were a pauper, then expect up to 50 people sharing a ward with you, so no privacy there. The wealthy were afforded a bit more privacy, but everyone was to abide by the daily routine of the asylum. The day started at 7 a.m. with tea or coffee and a bowl of porridge or bread. Then, if you were a good female patient, you worked in the laundry or sewing room. Others were to clean the asylum. Men would often work outside, tending the garden, out building, or in the kitchen making bread. For one reason or another, if you could not work or refused to, then you were allowed outside for 1 hour on the airing courts, either in the morning or the afternoon. Lunch was served at 12:30, then the afternoon chores would commence. Females were let out for an hour or so to experience the garden and fresh air, but only for a short time. The men were afforded extended time to work outside on the farm. Each asylum liked to be self-sufficient, and they made sure the inmates were put to as much use as possible in all areas. A light dinner of tea and cake was served in the early evening, just before patients were put to bed. Life in each asylum could vary greatly, as your quality of life was simply down to the moral character of the doctors and carers in charge of you. Many patients were terribly abused in all manner of ways. Little is actually recorded, but there are cases of female inmates becoming pregnant or other patients dying from treatment. It was a tough existence. Aside from daily chores, there were of course the treatments for each patient. During the early years, there was little understanding of how to properly treat mental health patients. It was about keeping the patients as quiet, calm, and relaxed as possible. This was achieved mainly via routine and selected treatments. Early treatments, of course, were barbaric. If you suffered from excitement and needed to be calmed, you may be treated to a padded room, which contained nothing other than horsehair padded walls. Another option was the straitjacket or fingerless gloves. Both provided restricted movement in order to calm you down. While the early years provided very little in the way of drug therapy, they did use a sedative to calm patients. It was often given in the night tea to make it easier to ensure a quick and quiet bedtime routine. The name was paraldehyde and proved useful for convulsions. It was not until the 20th century that further treatments were introduced, such as ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, and the beyond horrific lobotomy, which involved removing a small part of the brain. Water therapy in the early days was a popular solution. Some doctors used and abused it. Cold water treatments were designed to shock and often used as corrective therapy. You would be either tied to a chair and have buckets of cold water dumped on your head, or placed in a special room and sprayed with cold water for hours. It would have been an extremely traumatic experience every time you had to endure treatment. The warm water option was for patients suffering from melancholy. This treatment involved being placed in a bath on a canvas sheet, warm water up to your neck. They would drain the cold water and refill with warm. Not entirely a bad way to spend an afternoon. Now to the leaving part. Many patients were in fact not cured, or were even free again. The sad truth is that unless you were booked in for a short stay, or a family member came and collected them, you had little chance of leaving. A poor patient could easily spend the rest of their lives living in the asylum.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.